The afternoon sun beat down on Gila Bend, Arizona, as Tabitha Morrison stood beside her mother's fresh grave, dirt still dark and damp beneath the relentless June heat of 1883, while the townspeople whispered accusations that cut deeper than any knife could. She had killed her mother, they said, driven Margaret Morrison to an early death with her willful, stubborn ways and refusal to marry the banker's son who had courted her so persistently. The words hung in the desert air like vultures circling carrion, and Tabitha felt each venomous syllable pierce through her black mourning dress as she clutched the single wildflower she had placed on the wooden marker. Her hands trembled not from grief alone, though that threatened to consume her entirely, but from rage at the injustice of it all. Her mother had been sick for months, wasting away from something the town doctor could not name, something that hollowed out her cheeks and left her gasping for breath in the small adobe house they shared on the edge of town. Isaac Owens had watched the funeral from a respectful distance, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the dusty cemetery ground. He had seen consumption before, recognized it in the way Margaret Morrison had coughed blood into her handkerchief those last weeks, in the fever that made her skin translucent as parchment. He was a ranch hand, an occasional cowboy, a man who had spent his 26 years learning to read the land, animals, and people with equal skill. What he saw in Tabitha Morrison was not a murderer, but a young woman of 22 who had nursed her dying mother with devotion that would have shamed those now casting stones. He adjusted his worn leather hat and made his way toward her as the crowd dispersed, their duty to gossip fulfilled for the afternoon. "Miss Morrison," Isaac said quietly, his voice rough from years of shouting over cattle and wind, "I am sorry for your loss. Your mother was a good woman." Tabitha lifted her red-rimmed eyes to meet his gaze. She did not know this cowboy well, had seen him around town purchasing supplies or leading horses through the main street, but something in his weathered face spoke of kindness rather than judgment. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You are one of the few who seems to remember that." "I know what I saw," Isaac continued, standing beside her as others filtered away. "I delivered feed to the boarding house next to your place these past months. Heard you reading to her at night, saw you carrying water from the well in the heat of day. That was not the behavior of someone wishing harm." The words broke something loose inside Tabitha, and tears she had held back throughout the service spilled down her cheeks. "She had consumption," she said, the word tasting bitter. "Dr. Hartwell said it was just a seasonal illness, that she would recover, but I knew better. I begged him to send for a specialist from Tucson, but he refused, said I was being hysterical, that women always imagined things worse than they were." Isaac nodded slowly, anger flickering in his hazel eyes. He had little patience for fools, and Dr. Hartwell was proving himself the biggest fool in Gila Bend. Consumption does not care about a person's temperament or their daughter's marriage prospects. It is a disease, plain and simple. These people looking for someone to blame are just frightened of their own mortality. "They say I argued with her the week before she died," Tabitha continued, needing someone to hear the truth, "that I shouted and upset her so badly it accelerated her decline. But I was arguing with Charles Pemberton, the banker's son, telling him for the 100th time that I would not marry him. Mother was asleep in the next room. She never even woke." "Charles Pemberton is a snake in expensive boots," Isaac said bluntly, surprising a short laugh from Tabitha despite her grief. "Pardon my language, but it is the truth. He has been spreading these rumors, has he not?" Tabitha nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "He told everyone I was ungrateful, that my refusal to accept his proposal broke my mother's heart and weakened her constitution. People believed him because he has money and standing, and I am just the daughter of a seamstress." "Your mother was an excellent seamstress," Isaac corrected. "She altered my Sunday shirt so it actually fit my shoulders, never charged me more than was fair, and always had a kind word." He paused, studying Tabitha's face carefully. "What will you do now?" The question hung heavy between them. Tabitha had been asking herself the same thing since her mother had drawn her last rattling breath 3 days prior. I suppose I will continue her work. I know the trade well enough, learned at her knee since I was small. The house is paid for, though it is modest. If I can keep her customers, I might manage. And if they believe the gossip, if they take their business elsewhere? Tabitha's jaw tightened with determination that Isaac found himself admiring. Then I will find new customers. I will not leave Gila Bend with people thinking I am a murderess. I will not give them that satisfaction. Isaac respected that kind of stubbornness. It reminded him of wild horses that refused to break, the ones that retained their spirit even when domesticated. If you need someone to speak on your behalf, to tell people what consumption looks like, I will do it. I lost my own sister to the disease 5 years back in Texas. I know the signs well enough. Tabitha looked at him with surprise and something that might have been the first stirring of hope. You would do that? You barely know me. I know enough, Isaac said simply, and I know the difference between right and wrong. What is happening to you is wrong. The next weeks proved Isaac's offer was not merely empty words spoken in the emotion of a funeral. He began frequenting the general store when townspeople gathered, casually mentioning Margaret Morrison's symptoms, comparing them to what he had witnessed with his sister. He spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had seen death up close and recognized its true face. Some listened, their certainty wavering. Others, particularly those close to Charles Pemberton and his family, remained convinced of Tabitha's guilt through sheer stubborn pride that prevented them from admitting they might have been wrong. Tabitha threw herself into her work, taking in sewing and mending from anyone willing to bring it. The first week, only 3 customers came. The second week, 5. By the third week, a dozen women had knocked on her door, some with genuine garments needing repair, others clearly testing the waters of social acceptability. She treated each with professional courtesy, her stitches small and even, her rates fair. Slowly, grudgingly, some of the townspeople began to soften. Isaac found reasons to visit. He brought her a chicken that had stopped laying eggs, figuring she could use it for soup. He repaired her fence when he noticed it sagging. He sat on her small porch in the evenings after his work was done, talking about nothing important and everything significant. Tabitha found herself watching for his arrival, found her heart lifting when she saw his familiar figure walking up the dusty path to her door. You do not have to keep doing this, she told him one evening, as they sat watching the sun paint the desert sky in shades of orange and purple. People will talk about you too if you continue associating with me. Isaac took a long drink from the water she had brought him and shook his head. Let them talk. I have never cared much for the opinion of fools. He glanced at her, his expression serious. Besides, I find I enjoy your company, Miss Morrison. You have a quick mind and a strong spirit. Those are rare qualities. Tabitha felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the lingering desert warmth. Tabitha, she said softly, you can call me Tabitha. I think we are past formalities given everything. Tabitha, Isaac repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his rough voice. Then you must call me Isaac. Their friendship deepened as summer stretched long and hot across Arizona. Isaac taught Tabitha to ride better, taking her out on his steady mare to explore the desert beyond town. She had learned basic riding as a child, but Isaac showed her how to really move with a horse, how to read the animal's moods and respond accordingly. In turn, she altered his shirts and patched his worn trousers, refusing payment until he started bringing her vegetables from the ranch garden and fresh beef from cattle slaughter, calling it a fair trade. Charles Pemberton watched these developments with growing anger. He had expected Tabitha to come crawling to him eventually, desperate and alone, willing to accept his proposal out of pure necessity. Instead, she seemed to be thriving despite the scandal. And worse, she had that damned cowboy hovering around her like a faithful dog. Charles's pride could not tolerate the rejection, and his wounded ego demanded retribution. I hear Isaac Owens is spending considerable time at the Morrison place, Charles mentioned casually to his father over dinner one evening. People are beginning to wonder about the propriety of it all. A single woman, a single man, all those evening visits. Cornelius Pemberton, president of Gila Bend's only bank, frowned into his wine. The girl should have accepted your suit when she had the chance, would have saved everyone a great deal of trouble. She still could, Charles suggested, the idea forming even as he spoke. If circumstances became difficult enough, if her reputation was damaged beyond repair by association with a drifter cowboy, she might see reason. His father's eyes gleamed with understanding. The Pembertons had not built their fortune by being kind. What did you have in mind? The next Sunday, after church services, a small group of concerned citizens led by Charles Pemberton approached Tabitha as she prepared to walk home. Isaac had planned to accompany her, but he had been detained at the ranch with a horse gone lame and had not yet arrived in town. "Miss Morrison," Charles said, his voice carrying that particular tone of false concern that made Tabitha's skin crawl. "We need to discuss your living situation." "My living situation is none of your concern," Tabitha replied evenly, clutching her Bible. Several townspeople had stopped to watch, sensing drama. "I am afraid it is the concern of all decent people," Charles continued. "You are a young, unmarried woman living alone, and you have been entertaining a man unchaperoned for weeks now. Your mother would be mortified by such behavior." Tabitha's temper, usually well-controlled, flared white-hot. "Do not you dare speak of my mother. You who spread lies about me while her body was barely cold. You who could not accept that a woman might choose her own path rather than sell herself for financial security." Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. Women did not speak to men like Charles Pemberton that way, not in public, not ever. "You see?" Charles turned to the crowd, his expression triumphant. "This is exactly the kind of unnatural, shrewish behavior that contributed to her poor mother's decline. A proper woman knows her place, accepts the guidance of men who know better. Margaret Morrison died of heartbreak and shame over her daughter's conduct." "That is a lie!" Tabitha's voice rang out clear and strong across the churchyard. "My mother died of consumption, a disease that has nothing to do with emotion or behavior. Her lungs failed, she could not breathe. No amount of obedience or marriage proposals would have changed that medical fact." "Medical fact?" Charles laughed, and others joined nervously. "And where did you acquire medical knowledge? From your cowboy friend? Everyone knows Isaac Owens is just a drifter, barely educated, certainly not qualified to diagnose disease." "He knows more than Dr. Hartwell, apparently." Tabitha shot back. "At least Isaac recognized consumption when he saw it." "That is quite enough." Cornelius Pemberton stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of his position. "Miss Morrison, the bank holds several business loans in this town. People depend on our goodwill to maintain their livelihoods. I would hate to see good, decent families suffer because they associated with someone of questionable morals." The threat was clear and calculated. Support Tabitha and face financial ruin. Several women who had begun bringing her sewing work looked away uncomfortably. Tabitha felt the ground shift beneath her feet. This was not just about reputation anymore. Charles and his father were systematically trying to destroy any possibility of her independence. Before she could formulate a response, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Questionable morals?" Isaac had arrived, his horse breathing hard from a fast ride. He must have pushed the animal to get here. Must have known something was wrong. "The only questionable morals I see belong to a man who bullies a grieving woman and her elderly father who uses financial threats to enforce his will." "This does not concern you, Owens," Cornelius said coldly. "It concerns me greatly," Isaac replied, moving to stand beside Tabitha. His presence steadied her, gave her strength. "I will not stand by while good people are threatened by corrupt ones, regardless of how much money they hide behind." "Corrupt?" Charles's face flushed red. "You dare call my father corrupt? You are nobody, a common laborer who will drift out of this town just as you drifted in. My family built Gila Bend." "Your family may have money, but that does not give you the right to destroy someone's reputation with lies," Isaac said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Margaret Morrison died of consumption. I will swear to that in any court or before any authority. I watched my sister die of the same disease. I know the signs. Tabitha nursed her mother with devotion and compassion. The only crime committed here is the slander you have spread to satisfy your wounded pride because she had the good sense to refuse your proposal." The crowd murmured, and Tabitha noticed that some faces showed agreement rather than condemnation. Isaac's plain speaking had reached some of them, made them question the narrative Charles had crafted. "Furthermore," Isaac continued, addressing the crowd now rather than Charles, "if there is concern about propriety regarding my visits to Miss Morrison's home, let me resolve that now." He turned to Tabitha, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart race. "Tabitha, I know this is neither the time nor place I would have chosen, and we have not known each other long by conventional standards, but I have learned in my years that life is too short and uncertain to waste time on games. I care for you deeply. I respect your strength and intelligence. I would be honored if you would consider becoming my wife." The churchyard fell completely silent. Tabitha stared at Isaac, her mind reeling. Was this just for show? To protect her reputation? Or did he mean it? She searched his face and found no deception there, only honesty and something that looked remarkably like love. "I will not have you sacrifice yourself out of obligation," she whispered, low enough that only he could hear. "No sacrifice," he whispered back. "I have been wanting to ask for 2 weeks now. Just could not find the courage. Seemed like a good time." A small smile quirked his lips. Tabitha felt her own smile breaking through despite the circumstances. This man, this rough cowboy who had stood up for her when no one else would, who had shown her more kindness in a few short weeks than Charles Pemberton had in years of supposed courtship, was asking her to marry him. Not because he needed something from her, not to control or possess her, but because he genuinely cared. "Yes," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yes, Isaac, I will marry you." His face lit up with genuine joy, and he took her hand in his calloused one, squeezing gently. The crowd erupted in mixed reactions. Some women clapped, caught up in the romance of an unexpected proposal. Some men muttered about impropriety. Charles Pemberton looked like he had swallowed a wasp. "This is absurd," Charles sputtered. "You cannot seriously intend to marry this nobody. You are just doing this to spite me." "Not everything is about you, Charles," Tabitha said, surprised by how light she felt despite the confrontation. "In fact, almost nothing is about you. I am marrying Isaac because I choose to, because he is a good man who has shown me more genuine care and respect in weeks than you did in years." "You will regret this," Charles threatened, his composure cracking. "Both of you. My family has influence in this territory. We can make your lives very difficult." "Then you will prove yourself to be exactly the small, petty man I have always suspected you were," Tabitha replied. Isaac squeezed her hand again, pride evident in his expression. Cornelius Pemberton placed a hand on his son's arm, restraining him. "Come, Charles, we have wasted enough time here." He looked at Isaac with cold calculation. "I hope you realize what you are taking on, Owens. A woman with her reputation will be a burden wherever you go." "She has no burden except the lies you and your son have spread," Isaac replied evenly. "Those will fade with time when people see the truth." The Pembertons left, several of their closest allies following. But a surprising number of townspeople remained, and one by one, some approached to offer congratulations or quiet apologies. Not everyone, and not enough to erase the damage that had been done, but it was a start. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, was the first. "I am sorry, dear," she told Tabitha, her eyes moist. "I should have spoken up sooner. Your mother was my friend, and I knew she was sick long before anyone started saying otherwise. Consumption took my own husband 10 years back. I recognized it, but was too cowardly to contradict Charles Pemberton when he started spreading his poison. Please forgive an old woman's weakness." "There is nothing to forgive," Tabitha said, embracing her. "I understand that the Pembertons hold power over many people's livelihoods. Standing up to them takes courage." "Courage you have shown admirably," Mrs. Patterson said, patting her cheek. "Your mother would be proud. And I think your young man here is exactly what you deserve." Other women followed, some offering genuine apologies, others simply acknowledging the engagement with stiff courtesy that suggested they were reassessing their positions. The men were more reserved, but several shook Isaac's hand and welcomed him to what they jokingly called the ranks of the domesticated. When they finally walked to Tabitha's small adobe house together, the sun was setting in a spectacular display of red and gold. Isaac stayed outside on the porch, propriety demanding they maintain some distance now that an engagement had been declared, but they sat close enough that their shoulders touched. "Did you mean it?" Tabitha asked quietly. "About wanting to ask me before today?" "Every word," Isaac confirmed. "I was planning something better than a public spectacle in front of half the town, but when I rode up and saw Charles threatening you, saw his father making those implications, I could not hold back anymore. You needed someone to stand with you, and I wanted everyone to know that I choose to stand with you, not out of pity or obligation, but because I have come to love you, Tabitha Morrison." Her breath caught. They had danced around deeper feelings for weeks, but neither had spoken them aloud. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I think I have been falling in love with you since that first day at the cemetery when you were the only person who spoke with kindness instead of judgment." Isaac turned to face her fully, reaching up to cup her cheek with one rough palm. "May I kiss you? I know we should probably wait until the wedding, but I have been wanting to for so long." "Yes," Tabitha breathed, and when his lips met hers, gentle and sweet despite his rough exterior, she felt something settle into place deep within her soul. This was right. This was what love should feel like, a partnership built on respect and genuine affection, not the controlling possession Charles had offered. They set the wedding date for 3 weeks later, enough time to make basic preparations, but not so long that gossip could fester. Isaac moved into the boarding house to maintain propriety, though he still visited Tabitha's home during daylight hours, often accompanied by Mrs. Patterson as chaperone, now that the older woman had appointed herself their champion. The older woman threw herself into wedding preparations with enthusiasm that bordered on obsession, perhaps trying to make up for her earlier silence. She helped Tabitha alter her mother's best dress into a wedding gown, the blue fabric the color of summer sky. She arranged for the ceremony to be held in her boarding house parlor, which was larger than Tabitha's small home. She even convinced the reverend, who had initially been reluctant given the recent scandal, that performing the ceremony was his Christian duty. Isaac sold his horse and saddle, trading them in for a better wagon and team. He had been saving money from his ranch work for years, having few expenses and no vices. He showed Tabitha his savings, insisting she know exactly what financial situation she was entering. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to support them comfortably if combined with her sewing income. He had also secured a permanent position as foreman on the Double Bar Ranch 10 miles outside Gila Bend, a job that came with a small house and steady pay. "I know it is not much," he told her as they stood outside the ranch house that would become their home. It was a 2-room structure, simple but sturdy, with a covered porch and a view of the desert stretching endlessly toward distant mountains. "But it is honest work, and the owner is a fair man. We would have stability here." Tabitha looked at the house and felt peace wash over her. It was exactly what she wanted. Not a grand mansion bought with dirty money like the Pembertons possessed, but a real home earned through hard work and maintained with integrity. "It is perfect," she said honestly. "I can set up my sewing in the second room, take in work from the ranch families and nearby homesteads. We will build a good life here, Isaac." He pulled her close, mindful of Mrs. Patterson waiting in the wagon but needing to hold her. "We will," he agreed. "I promise. I will spend every day of my life trying to make you happy, trying to be worthy of your trust." "You are already worthy," Tabitha told him, reaching up to touch his face. "You saw me when others looked away. You believed in me when others condemned. You stood up for truth when lies were easier. That is the definition of a good man, Isaac Owens." The wedding day arrived with typical desert heat, the sun blazing overhead as guests gathered in Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. The turnout was better than Tabitha had dared hope. Most of the ranch families attended, along with several townspeople who had come to recognize the injustice done to her. Some stayed away, either out of lingering conviction that she was guilty or fear of the Pembertons, but Tabitha found she did not care. The people who mattered were present, and that was enough. She wore her mother's altered dress with wildflowers in her hair, flowers that Isaac had ridden out to pick that morning from a meadow he remembered seeing. She carried no formal bouquet, just a single stem of desert lavender, and when she walked into the parlor and saw Isaac standing at the front in a new shirt he had purchased for the occasion, she knew she was making the right choice. His eyes lit up when he saw her, and the smile that spread across his weathered face was worth more than all the formal words of love poets could write. This was real, this was true, and this was theirs. The Reverend kept the ceremony short and simple. They exchanged vows in clear voices, promising to honor and cherish each other through whatever life brought. When Isaac slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, another purchase from his savings, modest but genuine Tabitha felt tears prick her eyes. Her mother should have been here to see this. Margaret Morrison would have loved Isaac, would have appreciated his honesty and strength. "I wish my mother could have known you," Tabitha whispered, as they sealed their vows with a kiss. "I wish I could have known her better too," Isaac replied softly, "but I think she knew I would find you. I think somehow she sent me to that funeral that day." It was a fanciful thought, perhaps, but Tabitha chose to believe it. Her mother had always wanted her to find someone who would treat her as an equal, who would respect her mind and spirit. She had found exactly that in Isaac Owens. The wedding celebration was modest but joyful. Mrs. Patterson had prepared a feast with help from several ranch wives. There was roasted beef and potatoes, fresh bread, and even a small cake made with precious sugar. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing in the boarding house parlor until the stars came out. Charles Pemberton did not attend, of course, but Tabitha caught sight of him watching from across the street when she and Isaac left in their wagon, headed for their new home. There was hatred in his expression, but also defeat. He had lost, and he knew it. She had escaped his control, had found happiness without him, and that was a rejection his pride would never truly forgive. "Do not think about him," Isaac said, noticing the direction of her gaze. "This is our night, our beginning. The past is behind us." Tabitha turned away from the sight of Charles and focused instead on her husband. Her husband. The word felt wonderful. "You are right. I'm just glad to be done with all of it, to finally be moving forward." Their first night together in the ranch house was tender and sweet. Isaac was patient with her nervousness, gentle in his passion, and when they finally lay together in the darkness, Tabitha felt complete in a way she had not since her mother's death. This was family. This was home. This was love, built on a foundation that would last. The following weeks settled into a comfortable rhythm. Isaac left early each morning for his foreman duties, managing the ranch hands and cattle operations. Tabitha established her sewing business, word spreading among ranch families that Margaret Morrison's daughter had her mother's skill with a needle. Work came steadily, and she found satisfaction in creating beautiful garments and practical repairs while building friendships with the women who brought her their projects. Mrs. Patterson visited frequently, always bringing some small gift or treat, still trying to make up for her earlier silence. Tabitha finally sat her down one afternoon and told her firmly that all was forgiven, that she needed to stop feeling guilty and simply be the friend she had become. "You stood up for us when it mattered," Tabitha reminded her. "That took courage, and I will always be grateful. But now you need to let the guilt go, Martha. We are family now, you and I, and family does not keep score." The older woman had cried and hugged her fiercely, and from that day forward their friendship deepened into something like a mother-daughter bond that helped ease the ache of Margaret's loss. 3 months into their marriage, Tabitha realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with simultaneous joy and terror. She wanted children, wanted to build a family with Isaac, but the memory of her mother's suffering and death was still fresh. What if something went wrong? What if she too fell ill and left Isaac alone? She told him her news and her fears one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky. Isaac listened quietly, then pulled her close against his side. "We cannot live in fear of what might happen," he said gently. "Your mother's consumption had nothing to do with childbirth. That was a separate disease, one that takes victims regardless of their circumstances. We will find you the best doctor we can. We'll do everything possible to ensure both you and the baby stay healthy. But we cannot let fear steal our joy." "When did you become so wise?" Tabitha asked, trying to smile through her worry. "I married you, did I not?" "That was pretty wise," Isaac teased, earning a laugh from her. Then his expression turned serious. "I will not lie and say nothing could go wrong. Life on the frontier is hard, and sometimes tragedies happen, but I believe in us, Tabitha. I believe we are strong enough to face whatever comes together." His faith steadied her, as it always did. They would face this together just as they had faced everything else. Tabitha's pregnancy progressed normally through the fall and into winter. She continued her sewing work until her expanding belly made it difficult to reach the needle comfortably. Isaac was attentive and protective without being overbearing, bringing her small treats from town and rubbing her aching feet in the evenings. He talked to her stomach, telling their unborn child stories about horses and cattle, about the desert and its strange beauty. Tabitha would laugh and rest her hands over his, feeling their baby move beneath their joined palms. They had ridden into Tucson in her 4th month to see a proper physician, one with actual medical training rather than the questionable credentials of Dr. Hartwell. The Tucson doctor examined Tabitha thoroughly and pronounced her healthy and strong. The baby, developing normally. He gave them advice on nutrition and exercise, warning signs to watch for, and assured them that young, healthy women like Tabitha generally came through childbirth well. "Your mother's consumption was unrelated to any childbearing she did," the doctor confirmed when Tabitha asked directly. "Tuberculosis of the lungs is contracted through exposure to the disease, not caused by pregnancy or family stress. Whoever told you otherwise was either ignorant or malicious." "Both, I suspect," Isaac muttered, thinking of Charles Pemberton's lies. They returned to the ranch reassured and excited. Tabitha began sewing tiny garments for their baby, creating delicate gowns and sturdy little shirts. Martha Patterson knitted blankets and booties, clucking over Tabitha like a mother hen. The ranch wives threw a small celebration, gifting them with practical items like cloth diapers and a hand-carved cradle one of the ranch hands made in his spare time. Winter in the Arizona desert was mild compared to other territories, but it still brought cold nights and occasional frost. Tabitha stayed warm and comfortable in their well-built house while Isaac worked long hours preparing the ranch for spring calving season. He came home exhausted, but always made time to sit with her, to rest his head against her belly and marvel at the life growing within. "Boy or girl, do you think?" he asked one evening in early March, just weeks before the baby was due. "I do not know," Tabitha admitted, "but I hope whoever it is has your eyes and your stubborn determination to do what is right regardless of what others think." "I hope they have your strength and your forgiving heart," Isaac countered, "and maybe your talent with a needle because I am useless at mending." "I have noticed," Tabitha laughed, thinking of the many shirts she had repaired for him. Their son was born on a warm April morning in 1884, arriving after a long but uncomplicated labor attended by Martha Patterson and the ranch owner's wife, both experienced with birthing. Isaac paced outside until Martha finally called him in to meet his child. When he saw Tabitha holding their baby, both of them healthy and alive, tears streamed unashamedly down his weathered face. "We have a son," Tabitha said softly, exhausted but radiant. "A beautiful, perfect son." Isaac knelt beside the bed, touching the baby's impossibly small hand with one gentle finger. His son grasped it instinctively, and Isaac felt his heart expand with a love so fierce it was almost frightening. What should we name him? They had discussed names for months without reaching a decision. But looking at their baby now, seeing his shock of dark hair and the determined set of his tiny features even in sleep, the answer seemed obvious. Thomas, Tabitha said. Thomas Morrison Owens. After my mother's maiden name. She should be remembered. Should be part of our family's story. Thomas Morrison Owens, Isaac repeated, testing the sound. I like it. Strong name for a strong boy. He looked at Tabitha, love shining in his eyes. Thank you. For him, for giving me this family, for taking a chance on a rough cowboy who did not deserve you. You deserve everything good in this world, Tabitha told him firmly. And I am the lucky one, Isaac. You saved me when I needed saving, stood beside me when others turned away. You gave me love when I needed it most. Our son will grow up knowing what a real man looks like, what true strength and integrity mean. They stayed like that for a long moment, the three of them together in the quiet house, a family forged through hardship and sealed with genuine love. Thomas proved to be a healthy, hungry baby who demanded attention at all hours. Tabitha adapted to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else, though she was grateful when Martha Patterson came to stay for a few weeks, helping with the endless washing and cooking while Tabitha recovered and learned to nurse. Isaac was a devoted father from the start. He would wake in the night when Thomas cried, changing diapers and walking the floor with his son while Tabitha rested. He fashioned a sling so Tabitha could carry the baby while working, keeping him close and content. He sang to Thomas in a surprisingly tuneful voice, old cowboy songs and hymns he remembered from childhood. News of the baby's birth spread through Gila Bend, and several women who had shunned Tabitha after her mother's death now came to the ranch bearing gifts and congratulations. Some were genuine, happy to welcome a new life. Others were clearly just curious or seeking to mend fences now that it was clear the Owens family was established and thriving. Tabitha received them all with courtesy, but kept her true friendship for those who had stood by her when it mattered. Charles Pemberton, she heard through Martha Patterson's reliable gossip network, had finally married. He had chosen a young woman from Phoenix whose father owned a mining operation, a practical business alliance that apparently satisfied both families. Tabitha felt only relief at the news. Perhaps now he would finally leave her alone, move on with his own life, and let her live hers in peace. That hope was naive, she soon discovered. Thomas was 6 months old when Isaac came home one evening with a troubled expression. Tabitha, who had learned to read his moods with the accuracy of a compass reading true north, immediately set aside the shirt she was mending and gave him her full attention. What happened? She asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. Isaac sat down heavily, accepting the coffee she poured him but not drinking. Cornelius Pemberton was at the ranch today. He spoke with Mr. Harrison about water rights. The Double Bar Ranch shared a creek with several other properties, water being precious in the desert. Rights and access were carefully negotiated and legally documented. What about water rights? Tabitha asked, though she already felt the beginnings of dread. Pemberton claims the bank holds the original deed to the water source, says the current arrangement is based on verbal agreements that are not legally binding. He is threatening to cut off access unless certain fees are paid for continued use. Tabitha felt ice form in her stomach. Fees he just invented, I assume. This is about us, is it not? Charles cannot stand that we are happy, so his father is attacking your employment. That is my suspicion, Isaac agreed grimly. Mr. Harrison is furious, but he's also worried. Without guaranteed water access, the ranch operation becomes much more difficult. He might have to reduce staff, cut costs. As the newest foreman, I would likely be first to go. After everything we have been through, after we have finally built a life together, they are still trying to destroy us, Tabitha said, anger and fear warring in her chest. Thomas, sensing her distress, began to fuss in his cradle. She picked him up, holding him close for comfort. We will not let them win, Isaac said firmly, though Tabitha could hear the worry beneath his determination. Mr. Harrison is consulting with a lawyer in Tucson. He thinks Pemberton's claims are probably invalid, but proving it will take time and money. How much time? Tabitha asked. Weeks, maybe months. In the meantime, we just have to hold on. They held on. Mr. Harrison, loyal to his employees and outraged by what he correctly identified as blackmail, refused to fire Isaac. Instead, he gave him additional responsibilities, making him indispensable to ranch operations while the legal battle played out. Isaac worked harder than ever, often leaving before dawn and returning after dark, determined to prove his value beyond question. Tabitha increased her sewing output, taking on more complex projects that paid better. She made wedding dresses and Sunday suits, did intricate embroidery work that wealthy clients in Tucson would pay premium prices for. Martha Patterson acted as her agent, traveling to Tucson to show samples and secure commissions. Between them, they built a surprising income that helped cushion against the possibility of Isaac losing his position. The legal proceedings dragged through summer and into fall. Lawyers traded documents and arguments. Cornelius Pemberton remained confident, using his bank's resources to fund an aggressive legal strategy. But Mr. Harrison was stubborn and principled, refusing to be bullied regardless of the cost. The case finally went before a territorial judge in Tucson in November. Isaac and Tabitha made the trip with Mr. Harrison, leaving Thomas in Martha Patterson's capable care. They sat in the courtroom for 2 days while lawyers argued over deeds and water rights, historical usage, and legal precedent. The judge, an older man with a reputation for fairness, listened carefully to both sides. He examined the documents Pemberton presented, then reviewed the counter-evidence Harrison's lawyer provided. On the afternoon of the second day, he delivered his ruling. I find that the water rights in question have been established through more than adequate precedent and usage, the judge announced. The Double Bar Ranch and associated properties have maintained consistent access for over 20 years, documented through multiple testimonies and records. While the bank may hold certain historical deeds, those do not supersede the established legal rights confirmed by territorial water law. Mr. Pemberton's claims are denied. The gavel struck, and Tabitha felt Isaac's hand tighten around hers. They had won. The Pembertons had finally overreached, and their attempt at manipulation had failed. Cornelius Pemberton stormed from the courtroom, his face thunderous. Charles followed, and when his gaze met Tabitha's, she saw pure hatred there. She had rejected him, married beneath her station in his view, and now even his family's power and money had failed to punish her for that choice. His pride would never recover. Let it go, Isaac murmured, reading her thoughts. We won. That is what matters. They returned to the ranch in triumph. Mr. Harrison gave Isaac a raise and increased responsibilities, making his position even more secure. The ranch hands, who had been following the case with keen interest, celebrated the victory as their own. No one liked being pushed around by powerful men who thought money entitled them to whatever they wanted. Life settled into peace and prosperity. Thomas grew from a baby into a toddler, showing signs of his father's stubbornness and his mother's quick mind. He learned to walk holding onto Isaac's fingers, taking his first steps across the porch while both parents watched with pride. He learned to talk. His first word, "da," followed quickly by "ma," and then an endless stream of questions about everything he encountered. Tabitha's sewing business flourished. She became known throughout the territory for the quality of her work, women willing to wait months for one of her custom garments. She trained 2 younger women as apprentices, teaching them the skills her mother had taught her, ensuring Margaret Morrison's legacy continued. Isaac advanced to ranch manager, Mr. Harrison trusting him with significant decisions about operations and planning. He proved himself an excellent judge of cattle and horses, of land and weather. The ranch prospered under his management, and Isaac's reputation grew accordingly. Other ranchers began consulting him on breeding programs and range management. He was offered positions elsewhere at higher pay, but always declined. The Double Bar was home, and loyalty meant something to Isaac Owens. When Thomas was 3 years old, Tabitha discovered she was pregnant again. This time, there was no fear, only joy and excitement. She knew what to expect now, trusted her body and the doctors available to her. Isaac was delighted at the prospect of another child, hoping perhaps for a daughter this time, though he insisted he would be equally happy with another son. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1887, arriving quickly and easily compared to Thomas's lengthy labor. She was small and perfect, with wisps of blonde hair and blue eyes that would eventually darken to match her mother's. "Hannah," Tabitha said, holding her daughter for the first time. "Hannah Margaret Owens, after both our mothers." Isaac, holding 3-year-old Thomas so he could see his new sister, felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Perfect," he managed. "She is absolutely perfect, just like her mother." The years that followed were the happiest of Tabitha's life. She watched her children grow, Thomas becoming a serious little boy who followed his father everywhere, learning about horses and cattle and the land. Hannah was quieter, more thoughtful, showing an early interest in her mother's sewing. By the time she was 5, she was already learning simple stitches, her small fingers surprisingly dexterous. The Pembertons faded from their lives like a bad dream finally forgotten. Cornelius retired from the bank and moved to California, his health failing. Charles remained in Gila Bend, but their paths rarely crossed, and when they did, he looked through Tabitha as if she did not exist. She found she no longer cared. His opinion had ceased to matter years ago. Martha Patterson remained a constant presence in their lives, the grandmother their children would never have otherwise. She taught Hannah to bake and told Thomas stories about the old days when Arizona was even wilder than it was now. When she passed peacefully in her sleep in 1890, Tabitha and Isaac mourned her as they would a mother, and their children cried for the grandmother they had loved. The adobe house where Tabitha had nursed her dying mother, where she had been accused and ostracized, remained standing in Gila Bend. Tabitha sometimes rode into town to visit it, keeping it maintained though they no longer lived there. It was where her mother had lived and worked, where Margaret Morrison had built a life and raised a daughter. That deserved to be remembered and honored. On one such visit in the spring of 1892, Tabitha found someone waiting on the small porch. She recognized the woman after a moment, older and grayer, but still familiar. It was Mrs. Henderson, one of her mother's oldest customers, one of the first to turn away after Margaret's death. "Mrs. Owens," the woman said, standing nervously, "I hope you do not mind my waiting here. I wanted to speak with you privately." "Mrs. Henderson," Tabitha replied neutrally, dismounting from her horse. "What can I do for you?" "I wanted to apologize," the older woman said, the words tumbling out. "I should have done it years ago, but I was a coward. I was afraid of what the Pembertons might do if I spoke up for you, but that is no excuse. Your mother was good to me for 20 years, and I abandoned her daughter when she most needed support. I have regretted it every day since." Tabitha looked at the woman who had once brought her mother steady work, who had laughed and gossiped over fittings, who had disappeared the moment scandal touched the Morrison name. She could hold on to anger, could nurse the grudge that was certainly justified, or she could extend the grace she had been shown by others, the forgiveness that had allowed her to build a new life. "I appreciate your apology, Mrs. Henderson," Tabitha said finally. "I will not pretend the abandonment did not hurt, but I also understand fear and how it can make people act in ways they regret. I forgive you." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Your mother would be so proud of you, of the woman you have become, the family you have built. I have heard nothing but good things about you and your husband." "Isaac is a good man," Tabitha agreed, "the best I have ever known. He stood by me when others would not, and every day I am grateful for his love and partnership." They talked for a while longer, Mrs. Henderson sharing memories of Margaret Morrison that made Tabitha laugh and cry. When they parted, Tabitha felt something she had not realized she was still carrying finally lift away. The last bitter residue of those terrible days after her mother's death had dissolved, leaving only the good memories behind. She rode back to the ranch as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. Isaac was waiting on the porch, Thomas and Hannah playing in the yard under his watchful eye. At 9, Thomas was already showing signs of becoming tall like his father. At 5, Hannah was all energy and curiosity, constantly asking questions about everything she saw. Isaac stood when he saw her approaching, his face lighting with the smile that still made her heart skip even after nearly 9 years of marriage. Their children ran to greet her, and Tabitha dismounted to embrace them, breathing in their warmth and vitality. "Good trip?" Isaac asked, coming to take her horse's reins. "Very good," Tabitha confirmed. "I will tell you about it later." That evening, after the children were asleep, they sat on their porch as they had so many times before. Tabitha told Isaac about Mrs. Henderson's apology, about the closure it had brought. "Do you ever regret it?" Isaac asked quietly. "That afternoon at the church when I proposed in front of everyone? It was not exactly romantic, and you never had a real choice to refuse given the circumstances." Tabitha turned to look at him, this man who had given her everything worth having in her life. "I regret nothing," she said firmly. "You gave me a choice when no one else would. You stood up for truth when everyone else accepted lies. You loved me when I felt unlovable. Every day with you has been a gift, Isaac. I would not change a single moment." He pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The desert stretched endlessly around them, beautiful and harsh and unchanging. But they had changed. They had survived scandal and persecution, had built something real and lasting from the wreckage of loss and accusation. Their children slept safely inside their home, the product of a love that had defied expectations and exceeded all hopes. "I love you, Tabitha Owens," Isaac said into the darkness. "From that first day at the cemetery until my last breath, I will love you." "And I love you," Tabitha replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "My cowboy, my partner, my heart. Thank you for seeing the truth when others believed lies. Thank you for loving me." They had decades ahead of them still, years filled with the challenges and joys of raising children, managing the ranch, and growing old together. Thomas would eventually take over his father's position, running the double bar with the same integrity and skill Isaac had shown. Hannah would become a sought-after dressmaker, carrying on her grandmother's trade in a shop she opened in Tucson. Both children would marry well, choosing partners of character over wealth or social standing, having learned from their parents' example what truly mattered. But all of that was still to come. For now, on this spring evening in 1892, Isaac and Tabitha Owens sat together in peace, survivors of a storm that had tried to destroy them, stronger for having weathered it together. The accusations that had once threatened to bury Tabitha alongside her mother had been proven false. The love that had grown between a wronged woman and a cowboy who knew the truth had blossomed into something unshakable. In the years to come, people in Gila Bend would forget Charles Pemberton's lies. They would forget the scandal and whispers, but they would remember Tabitha and Isaac Owens as examples of integrity and devotion, as proof that love built on truth and respect could overcome any obstacle. Margaret Morrison's death from consumption would be recognized for what it was, a tragic loss to disease rather than any failing of her devoted daughter. And on warm spring evenings, long after Isaac and Tabitha had passed into memory themselves, their descendants would gather on porches throughout Arizona and tell the story of how a cowboy stood up for truth when everyone else believed lies, how a woman found love and justice after being wrongly accused, and how their courage and devotion built a legacy that would endure for generations. The desert had witnessed their struggle and their triumph. The land remembered, as it always did, the footsteps of those who walked it with purpose and love. Isaac and Tabitha Owens had claimed their place in its story, had written their own ending despite all attempts to author a different fate. They had proven that truth, though it might be denied for a time, would ultimately prevail, and that love, when built on a foundation of genuine respect and partnership, could withstand any test. Their story became legend in quiet ways, passed down through family gatherings and community memories. Young women facing pressure to marry poorly were told about Tabitha Morrison, who refused a wealthy man's proposal and found true love with a cowboy instead. Young men uncertain of their worth were reminded of Isaac Owens, who stood up for what was right, despite having no wealth or social standing to back him. Parents taught their children about the danger of gossip and false accusation, using the persecution Tabitha faced as an object lesson in the harm words could cause. The adobe house in Gila Bend became a landmark of sorts. Tabitha eventually gifted it to a young widow who needed a place to stay, continuing her mother's legacy of helping women in difficult circumstances. The house stood for another 50 years before finally succumbing to time and weather, but by then the Morrison name was synonymous with integrity and skill in sewing throughout the territory. Isaac rose to become one of the most respected ranchers in Arizona. When Mr. Harrison finally retired in 1895, he sold the double bar to Isaac at a price well below market value, recognizing the years of loyal service and excellent management. Isaac ran the ranch for another 30 years, expanding its holdings and reputation. He treated his workers fairly, paid decent wages, and never forgot what it felt like to be looked down upon by those who thought wealth equaled worth. Thomas and Hannah grew up secure in their parents' love, confident in their own worth regardless of others' opinions. They learned young that integrity mattered more than approval, that doing right was more important than being comfortable. Both carried those lessons into their own marriages and child rearing, creating another generation of Owens children who knew their family history and took pride in it. Tabitha continued her sewing work until arthritis finally made the fine stitching too difficult in her 60s. By then, she had trained a dozen apprentices, all of them women who needed a trade and the independence it provided. Several opened their own shops, always crediting Tabitha Morrison Owens as their teacher and inspiration. The tradition of quality and fairness Margaret Morrison had started continued through her daughter and then through the many women Tabitha taught. Charles Pemberton's marriage ended in scandal when his wife left him for a mining engineer unable to tolerate his controlling nature and bitter resentment any longer. He spent his later years alone and angry, his father's money unable to buy him the respect or happiness he craved. When he died in 1910, few mourned him beyond duty. His obituary mentioned his business dealings but not his character, a telling omission that spoke volumes about the man he had been. Isaac and Tabitha celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1923, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The party was held at the Double Bar Ranch, now one of the most prosperous operations in Arizona. Friends came from across the territory to honor the couple who had built such an impressive legacy not just in business but in family and community. 40 years, Tabitha said that evening, as she and Isaac escaped the party briefly to sit alone on their porch, the same porch where they'd spent countless evenings throughout their marriage. 40 years since you proposed in front of half of Gila Bend to save me from Charles Pemberton's scheming. Best decision I ever made, Isaac replied. His hair was white now, his face deeply lined from decades in the desert sun, but his eyes still held the same warmth and devotion they had shown that first day at the cemetery. Even if it was not exactly romantic, it was romantic enough, Tabitha assured him. She was 70 now, her hands gnarled with arthritis, but her spirit remained undimmed. You offered me love and partnership when I needed it most. You gave me a family and a life beyond anything I imagined possible in those dark days after Mother died. That is the most romantic thing in the world, Isaac. I love you, Tabitha Morrison Owens, Isaac said, as he had said countless times over 4 decades. Every day with you has been a blessing. And I love you, Isaac Owens, Tabitha replied, taking his weathered hand in hers. My cowboy, my champion, my heart. Thank you for seeing the truth when others would not, for standing beside me when others walked away. Thank you for giving me this beautiful life. They sat together watching the sunset paint the desert sky in brilliant colors, surrounded by the sounds of family celebration continuing inside. 4 decades of marriage, of partnership, of love that had overcome every obstacle placed in its path. They had built something lasting and good from the ashes of false accusation and grief. Their children and grandchildren were living proof that love based on respect and genuine affection would always triumph over attempts to control and manipulate. Isaac Owens passed peacefully in his sleep in 1928 at the age of 71. He died as he had lived, with integrity intact and surrounded by the love of his family. Tabitha held his hand as he drew his last breath, whispering words of love and gratitude for the life they had shared. Her grief was profound but not bitter. They had been given 45 years together, had raised children and grandchildren, had built a legacy of honor and love. That was more than many people ever received, and she was grateful for every moment. She lived another 5 years, those years filled with her children and their children, with sewing when her hands allowed and memories always. She spoke often of Isaac, keeping his memory alive for the youngest grandchildren who had barely known him. She told them stories about how he had defended her against false accusations, how he had stood up for truth when everyone else believed lies, how his love had saved her and given her everything worth having in life. When Tabitha Morrison Owens died in 1933 at the age of 73, she was buried beside Isaac in the small cemetery outside Gila Bend. Their matching headstones bore simple inscriptions of their names and dates, but everyone who knew their story understood that the simple markers concealed an epic of love and courage, of two people who had defied social expectations and overcome persecution to build something beautiful and lasting. The desert wind blew across their graves, as it had blown across the land throughout their lives, constant and unchanging. But the land itself had been changed by their presence, marked by their integrity and love. The Double Bar Ranch continued under Thomas's management and eventually his own sons, always run with the fairness and honesty Isaac had established. Tabitha's sewing students and their students carried on her traditions of quality work and fair dealing, her influence spreading far beyond what she could have imagined in those dark days after her mother's death. In the adobe house where Margaret Morrison had died, and where Tabitha had been accused of causing that death, other families came and went over the years. The house finally collapsed in the 1940s, but the lot remained, and eventually a historical marker was placed there. It told the story of Margaret Morrison, skilled seamstress, and her daughter Tabitha, who had been falsely accused of contributing to her mother's death from consumption. It mentioned Isaac Owens, the cowboy who had recognized the truth and stood up for justice. It became a stop on historical tours, a reminder of the price of gossip and the power of love to overcome injustice. Decades passed, then generations. The specific memories faded as those who had known Isaac and Tabitha personally passed away. But the story remained, told and retold in family gatherings and local histories. The core truth of it never changed. A young woman had been wrongly accused, a cowboy had recognized and defended the truth, and from that unlikely beginning had grown a love story that became legend. The desert remembered in its patient, eternal way. The land where Isaac and Tabitha had built their life together still stretched under the same sun, still bloomed with wildflowers in spring. The ranch they had created continued to prosper, generation after generation, carrying forward the values they had established. Their descendants spread throughout Arizona and beyond, always carrying with them the story of how their ancestors had faced injustice and overcome it through courage, integrity, and unwavering love. In the end, that was their true legacy. More valuable than land or money or any material thing. They had proven that truth mattered, that standing up for what was right had value even when it cost something, that love built on respect and genuine partnership could weather any storm. They had shown that accusations and gossip, however venomous, could not destroy a person who held fast to truth and was supported by someone who truly loved them. The Wild West had been wild indeed, full of injustice and hardship, violence and loss. But it had also been a place where people like Isaac and Tabitha Owens could forge new lives, could escape the rigid social hierarchies of the East and build something based on their own merit and character. They had seized that opportunity with both hands, had refused to be broken by false accusation or social persecution, and had created a family and legacy that endured long after they themselves had passed into the earth they had walked and loved. Their story became part of the larger tapestry of the American West, one thread among millions, but no less important for that. Every life mattered. Every love story had value. Every example of courage and integrity added to the collective heritage. Isaac and Tabitha Owens had lived well and loved well, had raised their children with honor, and built their community with honesty. That was enough. That was everything. And on warm spring evenings throughout the following century, when the desert air was sweet and the sky painted in gold and rose, descendants of Isaac and Tabitha would sometimes pause in their own busy lives and remember. They would think of the cowboy who had seen truth when others believed lies, of the woman who had survived false accusation and found true love, of the partnership that had overcome every obstacle and built something lasting and good. The land remembered, the family remembered, and in that remembering, Isaac and Tabitha Owens lived still, their love eternal as the desert itself, their story a testament to the enduring power of truth, courage, and devotion that recognized no boundaries and acknowledged no defeat. They had won their happiness against all odds, had claimed their place in history not through wealth or power, but through integrity and love. That victory, quiet and personal though it was, echoed through generations and would continue to echo as long as their story was told, a reminder that love built on truth and respect could indeed conquer all.